So if I can quickly just introduce who we are. My name is Andrew Ward. I'm going to do a bit of a rant in a bit. My friends Sophia and Tim, and you'll hear a bit more about them later on. Adam, over there, Adam Jeans, who will be at the end as such. But first of all, it's my great pleasure to introduce Michel Faber, the highly distinguished, best-selling, award-winning author who actually lives in Folkestone and who's going to read from his really important new book, Listen, which comes out in October. And the great thing about Folkestone Music Town is, of course, it's about making music, but it's also about writing about music and what we're doing today, thinking about music. So we're absolutely delighted that Michel is going to read from this chapter. And remember, you heard it here first.
Thank you, Andrew. I could pretend that I'm actually going to read from the book. This is the proof. It's not actually out yet. But what I've done for this event is made a special edit of a chapter called A Needle Through Your Brow, which is about music as an intervention in health. So basically, I'm going to miss out all the middle part of the chapter with all the interviews and just read you the bookends. The brain is an awesome device, but should have been packaged in a much larger, better protected container, all made of tougher stuff. It's squishy, quite easily damaged, permeable to harmful chemicals, and tends to shrivel up with age. One of the ironies of human existence is that we hatch our dreams of immortality inside a perishable camembert. The brain has an impressive, you might say mind-boggling, number of functions. Some of them keep working no matter what. Breathing, for instance, happens without us needing to remember to do it. Our cerebral cortex instructs the concertina of our rib cage to keep pumping our lungs hundreds of millions of times in a lifetime. It's pretty much guaranteed to be the last thing to go. Many of our other brain functions, however, are not robust, and there's no backup. Our recollections of facts, routines, the names of our friends and relatives, how to read, how to button up a shirt, how to recognize our children or our own faces, how to talk, how to feed ourselves, how not to soil ourselves, are stored in very specific pockets of the brain. When those parts get ruined, we lose what was logged there, and we can't find it anywhere else, and there's nowhere to reinstall it. Music is a different matter. It's too complex a thing to be housed in just one location. There is no single body part where music lives. MRI machines can scan and measure our brain's real-time responses to stimulus. When you're challenged to complete a non-musical task, recall a password, for example, or recite the days of the week, only one tiny spot reacts. Whereas when music enters our ears, multiple spots in the brain light up. You switch on all over. Externally, you may look calm, but on the inside, it's all go. The Beatles or Beyoncé may be nothing more than sparks in our neurotransmission, but we feel them, or think we feel them, in our hearts, our guts, our swaying bum, our dancing feet, our tear ducts, our sex organs, our souls, our mysterious core. What this means is that when parts of the brain get damaged or corroded, the music which was embedded in those parts is also embedded somewhere else. It's like finding lost files after a computer system crash. Maybe not the best or most complete versions of those files, but a hell of a lot better than nothing. And the chapter then goes on to address the various ways that music can reach parts of the brain that are compromised by disease or injury. I look at a mute, almost vegetating man in a nursing home who comes back to life when jolted by Cab Calloway. I look at a severely demented woman whose cognition improves when Bing Crosby croons to her. I look at stroke victims who can no longer speak but can sing. I interview Dr. Maggie Hirsch, an Australian consultant who champions individual playlists for music in aged care and declares that music is a human right. I interview the music therapist Adrian Snell, who works with profoundly disabled youngsters in Nepal and Albania. I write about my visit to Folkestone's Headstrong Singers, a choir of people with brain injuries, and I write about Grenville Hancock's sessions at Trinity Church with his Parkinson's choir, some of whom you will have heard singing earlier today. So, as I stand here in the Grand speaking to you, I'm still in reasonable neurological shape. I live alone and need no assistance. My flat has 13 concrete steps leading down to it. I nip up and down them without a thought. That won't last, but it's fine for now. If I feel like hearing one of the eerie electronica albums that give me joy, Astral Disaster by Coil, for example, I'm capable of making it happen. I know that the CD is filed in one of the bookshelves in my music room. I know that if I got up and walked there, which thankfully I can, I would find Astral Disaster amongst the other Coil albums in the Seas. So far, so good, cerebrally speaking. I remember that C comes after B and before D, and I remember what the album is called and who it's by. This suggests I don't have dementia yet, although the evidence for that is not conclusive because I do forget other musicians' names and album titles with much greater frequency nowadays than I used to. People with dementia remember the distant past better than the day before yesterday. I can recall virtually every word on Leo Sayer's 1974 LP, Just a Boy, and the names of the session musicians who worked on it, even though I haven't played the album in 45 years. Whereas in 2019, I got well into an intimate conversation with John Woolrich on what I thought was our first proper meeting before it dawned on me that I'd had an intimate conversation with him just a few months before. Is this my cerebellum shriveling up? I currently own thousands of hours of music, which I will never get to know as intimately as I got to know the music of my youth. Much of it is avant-garde and challenging. I'm not yet challenged by Parkinson's disease or a massive stroke which maims half my body. That phase of my life may begin next month or this afternoon. If I'm hit by such a misfortune, maybe I will spend my final years with a pair of headphones on, grooving to all the weird shit I've collected. I'd like to think that the cosmic melancholy of Coil's Astral Disaster will bring me consolation. But maybe the thing that will make my brain light up like a Christmas tree, make me rear up in my wheelchair, free my stifled voice to sing along, exorcising all my anger and sorrow as my dreams of immortality die, is 26-year-old Leo Sayer bitterly crying, "I was just a boy. I know better now." Thank you.
If you know Michel's work, you'll know that he finds it absolutely impossible to write a paragraph that isn't full of ideas and things to think about. So thank you very much for that. Okay, here's the rant. It starts off slowly but gets going as it gets going. A left field question to start with. Who was Wallace Hartley? Does anyone know who Wallace Hartley is? Was? Okay, well, Wallace was the leader of the 8 musicians, the 3 fiddlers, the 2 cellists, the double bass player and 2 pianists, who on the 15th of April 1912 played continuously for 2 hours as the Titanic sank into the icy North Atlantic. All the musicians perished. They literally died for their art. After the ship hit the fatal iceberg, they began playing in first class, but as time passed, they moved to second and then third class. Social distinctions began to erode. There were different reports on what the band actually played. Some survivors remember them playing jolly tunes. Several mentioned hearing Autumn, which was a big hit at the time. One lady insisted that as the ship went down, the band played Nearer, My God, to Thee. But this can't be a wholly reliable account, as she had escaped from the ship a good 14 minutes before the band stopped playing. Actually, it doesn't matter what they played. A human rationale can be made for whatever it was they were playing at the last minutes. What does matter is these musicians' immense bravery and dignity, which has rightly gone down in history as a truly remarkable phenomenon, speaking to the essence of what it is, or can be, to be human, and how, at unimaginably ghastly moments, it is music that gave people succour. Move 76 years forward to 1988, an example that Grenville has already mentioned, another remarkable phenomenon occurred, which was an act of historic resistance. 1.8 million people from Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania stood in line, holding flags, holding hands, waving flags across their country's borders in a brave and determined act of defiance to secure their independence after years of oppression from the Soviet Union. So they stood in line, they held hands, and they waved flags, but what else did they do? They sang. Songs of protest and national identity, a singing revolution, as it was described at the time. At this, the most critical moment in their lives, what else was there to do but to make music? And just last year, another extraordinary phenomenon occurred. On February the 14th of 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine began. The country was bombed and Kyiv was encircled. And as we know, 14 months later, the war continues. The Opera House in Kyiv, as well as all other cultural institutions, was closed. After weeks of fierce fighting and extraordinary Ukrainian bravery and military success, the Russian troops surrounding the city withdrew, but the bombing continued. Some weeks later, despite the continuing danger to life and limb, in an act of bold defiance, the Opera House was reopened. As a soldier put it at the time, this was a kind of promise that life will prevail. And what did the Opera House open with? Some paean to war, perhaps, like Prokofiev's War and Peace, or even Bloody Tosca? No. They started with a comedy, the effervescent Barber of Seville. The theatre could not be full due to the need to get people out of the building safely if there was an air raid. Well, they needn't have bothered because there was an air raid, but everyone stayed put, the players and the singers continued, and the music won out. Also, crucially, this was not a usual opera audience. Yes, there were people who were well off and there were people music educated, but there were more people who were just ordinary people, were soldiers in their uniforms, people who had never been to opera before. One of these opera newbies, a soldier called Volodymyr, spoke from the heart. I cannot say opera is my usual entertainment, but it is an incredible feeling to hear this music and to be in a different world for a little while before coming back to our reality. At the end of the performance, the orchestra and the singers were greeted with a 10-minute standing ovation. Now, I don't know if you've done a standing ovation, but if you do a standing ovation for about 90 seconds, it feels like a lifetime. 10 minutes is extraordinary. Now, history is peppered with similar examples that demonstrate when all said is and done, it is music that gets us through our critical moments. It is music that allows us to express what we feel and who we are. So keep those ideas in mind, and I want now to turn to some recent UK data. The Incorporated Society of Musicians recently reported that the number of students taking GCSE music fell by 19% between 2011 and 2021. 19%. Now that sounds bad, doesn't it? But wait for this. The number of students taking A-level music during the same period, that's 2011 to 2021, fell by a whopping 44%. And research by Birmingham City University, published in 21, indicates that A-level music in schools will disappear in less than a decade, if the current rate of decay continues. But music in schools is not all about exams. In 2019, the BPI, the British Phonographic Industry, reported there had been a 21% decline in funding for music in state schools over the previous 5 years. So that's 21% decline in 5 years. 2009, of course, was a critical year. It's a PC year, i.e. pre-COVID. And all the evidence indicates that music education was sorely hit during and indeed after the lockdowns and is yet to recover. So if anything, the situation, i.e. the rate of decline of funding, is now worse. Tucked away in this data was another seemingly much more positive figure. And this is that funding for music education in independent schools had increased by 7% in the previous 5 years. Now, on one level, that looks like good news, but after a moment's reflection, it soon becomes apparent this is indeed very worrying, for it indicates we're entering a world in which access to music education is increasingly being limited to the children of the rich and privileged. Dear God. And to make matters even worse, the government has mounted a concerted attack on art subjects in universities, announcing in 2019 that the funding for these courses should be cut by 50%. There has been a horrendous slashing of arts and humanities courses across the sector. And who was the mastermind for this brilliant move? One Gavin Williamson. One Sir Gavin Williamson. From any angle, this data reflects a crisis. At a time when the fastest growing sector in the world is the cultural industries, our national response has been to restrict access to creativity learning that underpins these industries. But the situation is even more crazy than this. For as we've learnt from the work of the people at this symposium, music reaches parts of the body and the life and society that nothing else does. I served on the advisory committee of the Music and Secondary School Trust, the trust that was set up by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Charles Wolfson, to help young children, students, learn a musical instrument. One of our streams of activity was to do a literature survey of research that had been undertaken across Europe on the effect of music education on the attainment of school children. If I remember correctly, there were about 200, just over 200 pieces of research we looked at, we assembled, analysed and digested. We needed to do this to demonstrate that music learning was not just a good in itself, but a means of boosting students' overall attainment, therefore making a case for an increase in funding for music education in schools. The research studies we looked at were very different, not surprising as they reflected the different cultures and contexts they came from. Some were very large surveys, others were quite small, and many different research techniques were employed. Not every single piece of research showed an improvement in attainment, but the significant majority did, and not one showed that the performance of children had deteriorated after they had undertaken some kind of music education. In other words, the data was looking only in one direction. We had numerous discussions about what we found with the education department, from civil servants, consultants to ministers. But we could make absolutely no headway with them. This is because they would not accept the overall findings of this research as being valid, because the research methods were so varied. They were not deemed to be rigorous enough as a kind of composite. Fair enough. But our point was surely the weight of all this research was persuasive enough to warrant the department to undertake a research programme that would meet their requirements of methodological rigour. They would not agree to this. Now, of course they wouldn't, because they knew that a thorough, rigorous piece of research would come up with the answers they did not want, namely that music education positively impacts on children's attainment in schools and is an effective way of improving education, cultural and behavioural outcomes. Of course, that attitude is partly about money, quality provision costs. But there's something distinctly Wildian about this. They know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. And in the context of a society where the funding for music education in independent schools is growing, there is something distinctly chilling about this refusal to embrace what everyone involved or has bothered to look at research knows to be the case. And this is that music makes things better. If all this points to a crisis, in recent months, things have got distinctly worse. There is a solution at the end, by the way. In November last year, the Arts Council announced that it's cutting funding to the English National Opera, totally, Glyndebourne, a lot, Welsh National Opera, quite a lot, Britain's Sinfonia, totally, London Sinfonietta, 41%, Sappho, totally, Donmar Warehouse, totally, Hampstead Theatre, totally, and many others, albeit at a less swinging level. Seeing the chair and the chief executive of the Arts Council literally make it up as they went along at the press conference announcing these cuts was a shameful, embarrassing experience. The E&O had been told the day before about their total excision from the national portfolio. The idea that the E&O should be moved to Manchester was made up on the spot. No one, and I mean no one, had been consulted about this as a possibility. And although there's been some restoration of the funding to the E&O subsequently, the move out of London is still a requirement of future funding, which in itself is no way guaranteed. What this was is an attack on what is perceived to be elitist art: opera, new music, new drama. I've heard from two friends who attended the same ACE meeting, Arts Council meeting, that a director stated the Arts Council concerned about the amount of funding going to orchestras because they are ableist. Ableist? Why? What does this mean? He meant that they are ableist because you have to be a world-class player to be part of a major professional orchestra. I kid you not. This is just another working of the elitist trope. It's instructive to remember, as Julia actually indicated, that in other spheres of endeavour, elitism is not to be repudiated, but something to aspire to and to be embraced. Who, for example, complains about elite sport? In March this year, the BBC announced that they would no longer fund the world-famous, universally admired BBC singers and would implement a 20% cut to the 3 English orchestras that there are. There was a massive concerted outcry, which I played a tiny part, that has brought about a reprieve of the acting of the BBC singers and a further review of the cuts to the orchestras. A reprieve and a review are exactly that. These iconic, unrivaled institutions remain under existential threat. These decisions, we were told, emerged from research the BBC undertook to review in their review of classical music. But contrary to what was explicitly claimed, this review, if you can find it, hidden as it is deep down a BBC rabbit hole, contains absolutely no primary research. We were also told that decisions about the BBC singers were made after consultation with choirs. Yet it's not been possible to find one single choir anywhere in the UK that had been consulted in any way by the BBC. There is no way of dodging that not only were these terrible decisions by the Arts Council and the BBC, but they were swayed in the most shocking mendacity. We've reached a point where policymakers in the Arts Council and the BBC are promulgating the utterly appalling idea that so-called classical music is somehow inherently not relevant to those who are young, working class and non-white. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in Folkestone. For I'm convinced that the answer to this crisis is to think local, to be community-based, to be arts-led, to work increasingly cross-genre and cross-art form, above all else, to collaborate. And what Grenville and Matt and John Woolwich and Zakonis and my friends here, Sophia and Tim and Chris Smith at Chambers, are doing in this town is simply amazing. Grenville, John Woolwich and I met last Saturday and mapped out around 50 concerts from the autumn onwards for the next year. And I'm just about to hear from Sophia and Tim about this tremendous phenomenon. There is music in May. Talk about a music town. So to put the matter slightly immodestly, we are the answer to this crisis. So, moving on to my friends here. Sophia and Tim are leading on Folkestone Music Town on Leading in Music in May. But they have lives besides that, although they sometimes forget that or haven't got time for them. But both are professional musicians. They both run CV Studio, which is a very successful hub for both professional musicians, but also training new generations of musicians. So I'd like you both to start off to say, how did you get involved in Folkestone Music Town in the first place?
Well, the very lovely lady Julia Jones, as you mentioned before, was responsible for attaining the awarding the status of being the world's first music town, which is amazing. And then lockdown happened. That happened at the end of 2019, didn't it, Julia? When she got the status after she did a lot of, incredible amount of work to make this happen. And we're all delighted. And then lockdown happened. So there wasn't really any opportunity for it to be celebrated and kind of shared and, let people know about it. And then after lockdown happened, the council approached Chris Smith at Chambers, as he's one of the oldest grassroots music venues in Folkestone and does an incredible amount of stuff for the community and for music in general. And myself and Tim, having Seaview Studio, obviously a recording studio, they approached us and said they were keen to celebrate the status and that Julia had got for us and to do something about it. And they had a welcome back fund. And they had an idea for a music and food market in the town outside the old Folkestone building, which was just something new to get people back out and in the community and just, not afraid to go out again, because a lot of people got a little bit shy and a little bit housebound after lockdown, and people lost their confidence a little bit. So it was lovely that they had this funding. So Tim and I set to work. We worked with Chambers a little bit. Chris was incredibly busy with some projects. So it ended up Tim and I kind of said, well, we can do that. Let's help. So that's what we did. We managed to hire and booked 16 local musicians to come and perform. It was sort of 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, every Friday and Saturday, 2 musicians a day. So it was lovely to be able to give a little bit of money back to some local musicians, get them out. They were delighted to play again. And that's where this whole Folkestone Music Town thing kind of reinvigorated. And we all agreed in the council, Lorraine at the council, who'd worked closely with Julia before and loved what she'd done, was like, we all sort of agreed, didn't we, that we can't let this die. We've got to make the most of this, because otherwise people will forget about that status. And it's pretty incredible to say we're the world's first music town. So that's where it kind of all started again, was doing these markets, and the whole thing was relaunched.
Can I just take one step back and then ask Tim, how did you get into Folkestone? How did you come to Folkestone in the first place?
I'm glad you asked, because, there's probably a little bit going chronologically back a little bit further than that. Sophia and I used to have a studio in Ashford, and an opportunity presented itself to move to Folkestone. And it's always been critical to me. I've worked in the music industry for many years. I've had day jobs as well, because I've had to. Which might be a point I'll touch on later on. But understanding the value of music, what it does for a community, I've seen firsthand, most of my life, and that's my raison d'etre entirely. So all of the talk which has been going on today, I just absolutely applaud, and there should be more of it. Education is absolutely crucial. Understanding the value of music to the human race is something of a personal crusade for me. So when we arrived in Folkestone, we were very much conscious of the fact that, community is key, collaboration is key. Musicians do an awful lot better if there's a cooperative culture around the town. Started attending Folkestone Music Town meetings, which had started to occur. And sure enough, we were somewhat upset, perturbed by the fact that, there were clearly frustrations from venue owners and promoters that were trying to provide the entertainment offering and music across the town, struggling to make things work a little bit. And again, it comes down to the same thing about education and awareness. So we set to work with our skills in networking, pulling people together, created a website so that we could help promote all things music in Folkestone, and help grease some cogs, make some connections, much like the way you make new neurological connections when you're learning how to play an instrument and stuff, so that we could play our part in helping Folkestone's community understand the value of music, get better at providing music. One of my favourite phrases is, if the water rises, everybody floats. So if everyone's aware of what's going on. The public get to enjoy music, get to have a lovely time. Businesses get to thrive on the back of it. So we have now a sustainable model. And also, perhaps even better than that, is that personal relationships can be forged and bonds. I mean, some of my closest and dearest friends are because of my activities in music, and he's probably quite a good example of that. So yeah, you know, it was obvious. It's in us. You know, we have to do it. So when the opportunity came up to move to Folkestone, we were like, right, here's somewhere where we can make an impact, make a positive difference, and we've been committed to that cause ever since.
We should just say that we have regular Folkestone Music Town meetings. And I think the last one was the lowest we ever had. It was only about 20 people there, but we've had up to 80. You know, and so what's been interesting about what we're doing and what these guys are leading on is that it really is a bottom-up thing. It is people actually coming together and to make something happen. And one of those things that's happened is Music in May. Yeah. So tell us about how music... Well, I know it's an impossible idea, but some people may not even know what Music in May is.
You must all know what Music in May is. Music in May, or Mimfest, it's now kind of just adopted that name, hasn't it? Mimfest. Yep. Music in May was an idea when we were talking to Lorraine at the council, we were discussing this with Julia and some of the team and things, and we knew we had to do something big because a lot of people were going, Folkestone, the world's first music town, but why? Nothing goes on here. And we're like, really? I mean, if anybody ever says that, give them my phone number, because they'll have me to deal with, or Tim's phone number, we'll put them right. But at the time, you know, you could understand why people were saying it, because it was very disjointed, like Tim said. We got here, and I know Tim had a few people in the studio, just in the same week, it just happened, there was a few people of the same age group doing the same genre of music that Tim said, oh, you must know such and such. No, I don't know them. What, but you surely you're doing the same thing. Well, you should, you know, and we're very much about connecting people together. So we knew that something big had to happen because there was a lot of confusion. What's Folkestone Music Town? Why is it the world's first music town? And we're like, well, you should hear what Julia's done. And, you know, we've got all the information behind it. But to the average layman, and just in quick, short terms, it's we had to do something big and put a stamp on the map this year to really kind of, you know, set it in stone and maintain and sustain this amazing status. So Tim and I were chatting with Lorraine Smith actually one day, wasn't it? And we said about I had the idea of a festival, and doing a field-type festival in Folkestone isn't the easiest because it's quite a small area with a lot of residential around any fields. And we kind of had started with the fringe type thing, and it was actually Katie Bradley, who's an amazing singer-songwriter who you might know from Folkestone, blues singer, she's incredible. She said, why don't you talk to Nigel Feist at Broadstairs Blues Bash? He's been doing that for 14 years very successfully, and it's done within venues. I said, well, that's brilliant, because this is what this whole thing is about. It's about supporting venues, keeping them open. You know, it breaks my heart to see a music venue shut at any time or even struggle. And, you know, especially when they see people like Chris, I know you use him as an example, it's because he does such a great job, and you see the work he puts in, and it's just phenomenal. So supporting the venues was the important thing. We had Three Hills come to us and suggest about a field event, which I got quite excited. I was a bit shiny object syndrome. Oh, you know, and you think about a big festival in a field and with a big stage and all that stuff, and kind of went away from what we was sort of thinking about with the venues. And I kind of got a bit excited. And then when you start looking in it and you start clocking up the numbers and realising how tricky it'll be, and then the licensing with residential around it wasn't going to...
Helicopters flying.
Yeah, we saw all of that happen. OK, let's just...
Only for her.
Yeah, coming to get me. Stop now, Sophia. But we then realised that, and it was quite good actually, because there was a few obstacles in the way that meant we couldn't do it in the field at Three Hills, which actually was great because it sort of brought me back down to earth and was like, yeah, actually where you were at the beginning was this multi-venue thing, which is what this whole thing is about. It's supporting Folkestone as a whole, as a town, as a community, keeping venues open, keeping creatives creative and allowing them to play. So we went back to that, interviewed Nigel Feist from Broadstairs Blues Bash, who's incredible. He gave us lots of tips about how it worked for him, and he's done 14 years of it. So, you know, he told us his mistakes and his, you know, successes and things. So that was really helpful. And then we set to doing that. I think it was actually Tim's idea. I'm giving you a bit of credit here. A lot of things are usually my idea, but I'm actually willing to admit this was your one. It was his idea.
It's being recorded, isn't it?
It's recorded. This.
Can I have a coffee?
Yeah, give him a coffee, please. But it was your idea to do May because of it being a less busy time of year. And Lorraine at the the council literally bit your hand off when you said that on our Zoom chat, didn't she? Because she said that's fantastic because everybody wants to do stuff like this in July, August when it's sunny and everything else, which is when there's lots of things going on, especially in Folkestone being a seaside town. Obviously, there's lots going on. So the whole supporting the town, because this doesn't just, support music and musicians and venues. This also has a knock-on effect with hotels, restaurants, bars, taxis, everything. I think Nigel Feist in Broadstairs, he's kind of famous there because everybody loves him because he literally fills their venues or their eateries or whatever it is, their taxis. He does this in February, so he's got one up on us. But
No, we're not doing February.
We're not doing February. That'd be a bit tricky. But it kind of went from there, didn't it, Tim? I'll let you carry on from there because
Yeah, I mean, obviously using the idea, the model concept, it's not a brand new thing, but to understand a little bit more from people that have been doing the multi-venue idea was really useful, and we had to go bigger, didn't we? So we're like, we'll do a month, music in May because it's alliteration.
So, yeah.
Well, exactly. If you're not going to go big, then go home. So I mean, we could have done looked at a festival weekend, but we felt that drawing it out over the course of a much longer period of time would give far more opportunity for far more engagement from far more businesses and the public and tourism and so on and so forth. And, the weather starts to get a little bit warmer, which offers the prospect of, potentially some outdoor gigs. I don't think we'd have had many people busking if we were doing it in February or January or December or November. So it just kind of fell into place, just made sense a little bit, really. Someone mentioned common sense earlier, although unfortunately it's probably not as common as it could be. It just makes sense, and obviously we had the 2 bank holiday weekends already anyway. We've got lucky with the 3rd. It just seemed to all match up very nicely. And then once that was in place, it was like, right, let's shout about it. And I think, perhaps the testament to the idea's merits is the amount of support for it which we've managed to garner, and some of the things which we've been able to achieve now from having a much bigger team is phenomenal and warms my heart immeasurably.
I mean, I think we said already that it is a community-based activity, but the other thing which I think is quite distinctive about it is that it's totally inclusive, and you guys have been absolutely strong on that from the moment we got. So the Zaccone Chamber Festival, which is well-renowned and well-established, is now part of Music in May. We have a fantastic gig on the 18th of May, where the Zaccones are playing as a warm-up band for Arisund, who are a pop band as such. And that has happened before, but not quite in this way. So that kind of actually trying to do really quite innovative things with absolutely not a bean. It's something quite special.
Yeah, something you just said on that. Sorry to interrupt. When we were talking to David Sharp at Academy FM, who's done a massive support package, they're doing lots on the radio. We've got adverts and stuff happening, interviews all the time. And we came up with a few strap lines, and I kind of just found myself saying it after the guy, what was his name, from the church, St Ainsworth Church, he basically got in touch a few meetings ago and said, oh, but we're doing an organ recital. Does that count? I said, absolutely, it counts. It's music. If it's music, it counts. So I've kind of just fallen into this thing of saying from string quartets to DJ sets, that everything is involved. If it's music, it's music, and absolutely, we don't want anybody to feel left out. And there really is. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the flyer here, but this is our 4-page brochure. So on the front, you've got a list of all the different artists. Inside is the schedule of everything. And on the back is like a map with the venues, supporting venues and sponsors and things. We've basically got over 150 different workshops, jams, gigs, musical activities in the whole of May. So it's pretty phenomenal, and we're doing free workshops and all sorts. But to have that much in, I mean, we have been told that we're slightly mental because people that organise a weekend festival nearly have a nervous breakdown. They're like, "Were you mad doing a whole month?" I'm like, "Yep, clearly we are." But yeah, just on that point, right, from string quartets to DJ sets, it literally is everything.
So when people talk about things done through blood, sweat, and tears, we mean it literally.
Yes, literally.
I loved what you said about, the fact that you raised the thing about the Titanic and the musicians there. And a very dear friend of mine who's quite an established producer said to me once, that you should bleed for your art. So to be honest, it obviously it's a massive amount of work and a massive amount of stress, but it absolutely has to happen.
Yeah.
And that comes first.
Brilliant. So let me ask you, what's been your favourite gig so far? I know we're quite early in, but what's your favourite gig so far? And you've got to give the right answer here, by the way.
Should we say it at the same time?
I think there is a right
I
answer.
think there's the right answer.
Yeah.
It was the opening party on Saturday, of course. It was a massive amount of work to bring that together, but absolutely worth it. To have an 18-piece big beer band, or big band, they're a big band, but they're known as the Big Beer Band because they like beer, come down from London. They're pit orchestra musicians. They're world-class session musicians that are working in the orchestras every day as their day jobs, but on the side they do this big beer band. They love music so much that they, although they do it all day and earn good money from and doing high-class gigs, they get together. It was crazy because Bob said to us, "Sophia and Tim, have you got a Monday evening spare that you can come to Croydon, like, soon?" He was like, "I found this band that somebody's told me I've got to see, and they practice in this back street pub in Croydon on a Monday evening. There's there's actually 200 of them altogether." So basically, Nigel is amazing. Because he knows the fickleness and, the busyness of musicians, he basically has, 10 trumpeters, 10 saxophonists and whatnot. So he's got a massive pool to call on. So if ever when they want to get together with 18 people, there's enough of them, at least one trumpeter will turn up. So we went to this backstreet pub, didn't we, and got hit by this wall of sound, and they were phenomenal. And they just get in there to practice for fun. So the Big Beer Band fly under the radar a little bit, because that's not their main thing. But Bob said we had to see them. When we went to see them, we realised that, we did have to see them, and we organised to bring them down for because we knew the opening party weekend, because we didn't just have one opening party, we had two. Friday night was Jazzy B from Soul to Soul at Chambers, which of course was pretty epic, and then Saturday night was the Big Beer Band featuring special guest vocalists, which was Katie Bradley, Nina Clark, myself, and then we got the amazing actress, writer and comedian Jessica Hines, who we found out can also sing, and she's pretty good, isn't she? So she came along as well, which, obviously gave us a little bit of extra pizzazz to the evening, and it was a massive success. We had about 300 people at the Quarter House.
And they told us we couldn't do it.
Yeah, we did get told. It was doubted by a few because it was something a bit different. But that's what's important, is that we brought something fresh and new to Folkestone that we'd never seen before. It was rather great, and the whole rest of the month now kind of has sort of been set in that tone, hasn't it? So no pressure. Everything else we do now has to be that good.
So one more question before we bring on Adam, and the question is, will we be doing Music in May next year?
Yes.
What he said. Yeah, we plan to do this every
And the year after.
Yeah.
And the year after.
Yeah, ongoing.
You must give a big warm applause to these guys. They're fantastic. I've worked with all sorts of people in my life, but these guys are really, really impressive.
Making me blush.
Adam. Hello. Adam Jeans is an independent producer. He's also lives in Folkestone. And is senior relationship manager at the Arts Council in London. Yeah.
So I came to Folkestone about 6 years ago, and when I came here, I knew it was like a visual arts place. That's what I thought. And then Anna Braithwaite, composer, did a very kind thing and drew me a map, a little diagram on the back of a napkin of how all the music organisations fitted together in Folkestone. It was really fascinating. I've lost
Still
that.
got it?
I've lost it. I've been looking for it desperately for this meeting. So that was interesting to me because I didn't realise that. I thought Folkestone was a visual arts town. I thought it was a town that did a public arts event. But actually, when I came here, I suddenly found there was hundreds of musicians, and I came here because it was visual arts, but I'm staying here because it's music. Now, the other reason I came to Folkestone is because in my previous life, I was the project director of a European Union-funded project which produced arts events in seaside towns. So I'm fascinated by seaside towns. In fact, I came to Folkestone for the first time while I was doing that particular project because it was a seaside town with an arts event in it. And I've spent a lot of time, basically, among coastal communities and resorts and seaports all over Europe. Some of them are nicer than others, I have to say. But they're places which are fascinating because they're very much all alike. They've all got the same issues, and they're more like each other than they are the towns in the rest of their country. And they're all facing, certainly the ones I was working in Eastern Europe, were looking at the aftermath of the fall of communism. They were thinking about deindustrialization and globalization. They'd lost their identities. They were trying to find something else. And one of the things they were thinking that maybe would make the place a more stable economy and a more happy place for people to want to live in would be culture. And they were facing all those sorts of problems. It didn't matter where it was. If it was Bulgaria, Romania, I just wrote them all down, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, even in the west of Europe. I did the project in Skegness. Had the same problems as these other places where you had young people were leaving, there was an aging population, there was an economy that was falling, all those things the same. Now, what the project I was doing was actually about giving people, empowering the people of the place to have a voice during this change. If the governments were, the city governments were trying to change move things forward, what was the place or role of the people? And so we were using artists. We were basically using artists from the place and from outside, amateur artists who were there, singers, dancers, people who were telling their stories about the town, and it was being converted into work which would be produced, but it wasn't going to be presented in let's say, theatres or in nice opera houses and things like that. We were going to do it on the street. So we used to do it on the street, we used to do it in an unconventional space, we used to do it on the beach. You could do it in the warehouses. I mean, the sorts of things that you find in most of these seaside towns were empty spaces, maybe venues which were actually shut down or derelict or not being used anymore. We would reopen them and use them. So when I came to Folkestone, and then look, this place we're in right now, a found space like this. So when I came to Folkestone, I felt as though I said, well, gosh, this is exactly the sort of thing I want to get involved in. So I'm delighted that something like Music and May has come along, because it does have that kind of grassroots thing. It's what Andrew said is absolutely right. Now, I think it's what we were doing with those artists, as I explained before, was this sense of mediation between the people and the politicians, between the authorities and civil society, the ordinary people in the street. But I have to say to you, we were not fools. We knew that there's a limit to how much power artists are given or allowed to have in society, and you have to remember that. Art, it doesn't get funded enough to really be disruptive to the hierarchy, okay? And that's probably why it doesn't get funded very much either. But I had a motto which I kept trotting out to people when we were doing the interviews and things, and it was, okay, art can't change the world, but it can help the world to imagine change. The idea being that we're here in Folkestone. It's the world's first music town, courtesy of Julia. Habitat conference in the UN Habitat conference in Kuala Lumpur, very glamorous. I think because we've got that title, we've probably got a bit of a duty now to show how a town could change as a result of putting music right at the centre of things. So there are other places in UN, UNESCO, cities of music. Places, they're like Liverpool and Havana and Adelaide and Brazzaville, Chennai, places like this. They're big cities with big issues, right? And they've all identified creativity and creativity and music in particular as a strategic factor for sustainable urban development. So the UN has these 17 sustainable development goals to be achieved by 2030. So things like no poverty, zero hunger, gender equality, climate action, things like that, 17 of them. They don't mention music directly, but it is clear, I think, that music can help. And in fact, it was during that conference when the UN had its first discussion of how music could help deliver these goals that Folkestone was first presented by Julia as a music town. So we were right there from the very first moment, from the ground up. So what does that could actually mean for us practically in this little bit of the globe? Firstly, I think it's because we are a town. We're quite a small thing rather than a big city. You know, something of this size, you can see the benefits of collective action much more clearly than you can in a big, complicated city. We're a bit of a beacon for that, you know. So you can see the resources. We're talking about sort of meaningful, thousands of pounds rather than millions and billions of dollars, whatever people are spending to make their cities music cities. And if you can see the benefits, that will bring other benefits, and that will generate a virtuous circle. People realise if they put things in, they will get something out. Secondly, I think we probably definitely need a development plan, a coordination plan, a master plan for music in Folkestone that brings together the people, the civil society, who you can say is like the audience, the politicians, the funders and the sponsors, the social service providers, the music people, the organisations and the organisers. So, because really nothing will change unless you make coalitions. And importantly, coalitions between music people and non-music people. And since we're following the UN sustainable goals, we probably also need to have a timeline and a target for 2030. That's their target, that should be ours. So, what are we going to set ourselves as targets? So, by 2030, could Folkestone have a concert hall? Could Folkestone have a big nightclub? Or does it need more rehearsal space? So, going back to what Andrew was saying, what percentage of children in Folkestone should be learning musical instruments and singing regularly in the town and taking GCSE and A-level music? Should we set ourselves that target and work towards it? How many music tourists should we be having in the town? You know, what should be the gross added value turnover from music tourism in Folkestone? Should we set ourselves a target for that as well? Blunt things like that. You know, lay it out, map it out, like Anna's little map. You just put on the back of an envelope, maybe. We'd be able to say, OK, this is going to be helpful. Third thing, I think we need to celebrate our heritage. You know, Noel Redding, we've talked a little bit about Noel. Another Noel strikes in my mind, because you've got an event, I think, on the 11th with Noel Coward's.
Thanks for plug.
Tickets available in musical places. You know, there are many other examples. One that's very close to my heart is found out that George Grossmith, who was the original patter song singer from Gilbert and Sullivan, lived in Folkestone. I was delighted to discover that. I hope that might be an opportunity for an event.
Yes, definitely.
You know, fourth, I could go on forever, but this is the last one. So I think the Folkestone Music Town can reach out to other places and can work not just locally, regionally, nationally, but internationally. I think we're going to be given something like that by the United Nations. It kind of comes with the title. You should think about that. Because, you know, these local issues that we have are also global ones. You know, we've got some power as the world's first music town. You know, we can join in discussions that perhaps we thought we never could join in. Issues around health and well-being, for example, are global. This conference, you know, there's a lot that has a lot to say here about, you know, and it needs to be heard more wider audience. Folkestone is on the front line of the global migrant crisis. And, you know, we've got something to say about that, as many other towns are. And we've got an excellent example of a culturally regenerated seaside town. As I said earlier, that's valuable. There are a lot of seaside places that would literally kill to be Folkestone. So.
Yeah, it is.
Settle for figuratively.
So we can be a teacher as well. I think that's what we are, and we can help other people do it. And I think we can indeed help the world to imagine change. Thank you very much.
Yes.